and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please remember to visit the website podcastufo.com for past episodes, blogs, and forums. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and happy Eve of Christmas Eve, something like that. Alejandro Rojas will be coming up with the news in a few minutes. But before that, just a reiteration, we are live on Podcast UFO. We have a player right on the sidebar. And a few people may be listening over at the Dark Matter Digital Network, but that would be a old pre-recorded rerun. And so we are going to be on the Podcast UFO live every week, same time as always. And tonight's guest, we have two people on. We have Stan Gordon on and John Ventre, and they're both going to have sort of a point-counterpoint on what the Kecksburg may or may not have been, whether it was a GE Mark II re-entry vehicle or something else. So it's, I would say, kind of a debate. We'll see what happens. And that'll be for the first hour. And the second hour is just going to be Stan Gordon. We're going to be talking about what's going on in the Keystone State in Pennsylvania. He's a great researcher, so it should be very interesting. So, again, the shows are always going to be here on Podcast UFO, Wednesdays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And come over to the chat room and chime in. We also have a phone line that is 603-967-4030 for anyone that wants to call in. And I guess that's about it. I want to say if you celebrate Christmas, I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and happy holidays to all of you out there. And here we go. How are you, Alejandro?
Good. How are you doing?
Great. Good to have you on, sir.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I got a little frog kind of in my throat there for a second.
I thought that was a frog or alien or something.
Yeah, something freaky going on. But it's all cleared out now, and so I'm much better, and I'm ready to go. How are you doing?
Doing great. I am doing great. Getting ready for Christmas, only a day or so away. And,
wow.
Hasn't it come up fast this year?
It has come up extremely fast, and it's going to be gone before you know it. It's going to seem like probably 45 minutes between now and the time that we're doing this again next week.
That's right. And then New Year.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep. New Year is, I found out, being in Russia this year, that New Year is celebrated greatly in Russia. Not that I was there during New Year, but there was some talk about that Christmas is no big deal, but New Year is a real big deal.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if you mess up celebrating New Year, there's a saying they have in Russia, and that is, whatever you're doing on New Year's Eve is going to shape the whole year ahead.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was throw American man off cliff.
Oh, no, that's only some of them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So what's going down for the UFO news?
Lots of stuff going on, and this first one reminds me of some news about the UFO Congress. And that is why it's okay if I share that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is a Christmas tree UFO sighting, and this reminds me of some of the big news we were talking about that I couldn't release on your show last week. I think that's what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Our last speaker, and this is exciting because these guys have been guests on your show, but our exciting announcement, which I haven't even put online, so it's only been on my show and your show that I've even told people about this, but it will be Doug Trumbull and Mark D'Antonio coming to speak at the UFO Congress. Wow. And why is that exciting? Yeah. Well, because Doug Trumbull is a special effects guru who did the special effects for my, top favorite movies in the whole world, like Close Encounters, 2001, Blade Runner, and speaking of Close Encounters, that UFO at the end of it is often referred to as a Christmas tree UFO, and that's similar to the first story I'm going to talk about in a minute here.
Well, you know, I actually watched Close Encounters the other night after you and I had a conversation about, you were wondering why I hadn't watched it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, it really is a great movie. It's timeless.
I know,
would say.
isn't it? It is timeless. It's amazing.
Yeah, and then actually to see J. Allen Hynek, I never knew that he was actually had an appearance, a walk-on.
Oh, you didn't?
Nope. And then
seen my lecture on that.
Okay, then the French character that I guess is supposed to be Jacques Vallée?
Exactly, Jacques Vallée, who's going to be at the conference. And it turns out that Jacques Vallée and Doug Trumbull are friends. So they've been talking and both excited to see each other at the conference.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, are we going to do a round table or something at the end like you did last year?
Yeah, we will. However, I'm not sure if either of those guys will be able to join it. We'll see. But that reminds me of, since you mentioned it, J. Allen Hynek, Frank Warren, he runs UFOchronicles.com, another UFO website. And I just found it because I remembered this. Just like about a month ago, he sent out a picture. It was a Christmas card with J. Allen Hynek in it, and he's kind of getting taken away by aliens in a UFO. But it was a Christmas card that Frank Warren, I don't know how he got it. He said Henry McKay gave it to him, but it's pretty funny. The caption reads, "We did it. We caught Santa Claus," because really referring to Hynek's white beard and everything. That is a little Santa Claus-ish.
Yeah.
Like you saw in the movie.
Right. So, did you did I interrupt you in that story about the Christmas tree? Or
No, I mentioned that exciting piece of news, and then we'll get into the Christmas tree. And you've had him on the show, right?
Yes, Doug Trumbull has been on with Mark. It was a great show.
Talking about UFO-TOG, and that's what they'll be talking about. And I'm sure you probably had Mark on several times.
Yeah, Mark's been on a number of times. I was at his place a little while ago.
That's
Did a
right.
show from there. Yeah.
How cool.
He is an awesome guy.
Yeah, I got to see you guys like FaceTime or something like that.
Right, yeah. That's right. You did join
via
in.
video.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Awesome. Yeah, so this first story is about a Christmas tree, and now that I think about it, it might have been the E.T. UFO that was referred to the Christmas tree. But I guess they both look similar, the E.T. UFO and the Close Encounters one. They're both huge. Steven Spielberg, too.
Right.
So that brings me to the story about the UFOs shaped like Christmas trees. So this is an interesting case. This was in Tennessee, Bluff City. It took place on December 10th, 2015. It was about 6 p.m. When someone was driving. They were a passenger in a vehicle when they saw these couple of odd objects. He said that they flew in sets of two, that they traveled side by side, and they resembled Christmas trees and were flashing, and they were in the sky and did not have the mountains or trees as their background, they said. Each one was not quite the same color. They appeared orangish red. One was blue and white. The witness says, we knew they were either suppressed government technology or alien in origin. So they also said there was a helicopter scene with a spotlight that came through the area. There weren't any photos or videos, but this one's being investigated by Tennessee MUFON.
Did the first one have like a red light, like a red nose reindeer? No.
Christmas trees, not reindeer.
Oh, all right, I know, but you said sets of two, so anyway.
Yeah, that was cute. I get it, where you're headed there.
Okay.
But yeah, they said the incident lasted about 20, 30 minutes. And so it's just an anecdotal report and kind of interesting. I mean, it raises a little bit of a red flag where they're like, it was so spectacular, sets of two, and then a helicopter comes flying in. But I guess you never know. We'll have to see what Tennessee MUFON finds out if they go and interview this gentleman.
Right. Yeah. Well, it would be kind of hard to make up something like that. So it would be interesting to find out how that all pans out, or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it is Christmas, so Christmas
right.
tree flying saucers, flying Christmas trees.
It must have been beautiful, actually.
Yeah. So a few days later, another story, this one also written by Roger from the Mutual UFO Network, from their case files, this sighting was a few days later, and there was a video in this one. This is December 13th, 2015. This was at 5:43 p.m., and as you can see in the video, it's very dark. And in the video, you see what this person describes, which is 3 lights in a triangular formation. This person felt this was a triangular, low-flying triangular U-shaped UFO. And I don't know, it's hard to say. From the video alone, it looks like it could be an airplane, but the witness describes that he felt that it wasn't, that it looked triangular. So it's another one of those things that's, hard to say. So they said that it did go over their car, and they felt it was about 50 feet above the car. And then it sped up at an incredible speed and took off very quickly.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's always hard to say with these because they said they were in a car, so it could be a plane that they mistaken and, it just perceived. It was all perception, the movement of the craft, or it could have been something genuinely mysterious. Hard to say.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool. Well, Alejandro, this is it's been a real good year with you, and next week you and I and Lee Spiegel. You want to talk about that?
Oh, yeah, next week. So we'll do an end-of-a-year review. So you and I and Mr. Lee Spiegel, who's, of course, doing news for the mainstream media on a regular basis on UFOs, we'll talk about the year in review, or we'll talk about, I guess, some best cases of the year. So be sure to look through those 2015 cases and be prepared to talk about your favorite. I think what we usually do is kind of a round-robin type of thing where we go, okay, Martin, it's your turn. What's your next top case? And then you can talk about it. And then we go to Lee. And what we found in the past, and you'll probably be similar as well, is that often many of the same cases, we choose many of the same cases. Although sometimes, Lee will come up with a weird one where I'll be like, what? That's one of your favorites?
So does this mean I'm going to have
we argue about it.
I'm going to have to do homework.
You have to do a little bit of homework, yeah.
Wow.
Brainstorm. And, it is good to look over, because every year I look over the stories from the previous year, and I forget how many great stories there were.
Uh-huh.
And so, and it helps me remember some of the great stories, because we cover these stories so often that often there'll be a good one, and we talk about it, and you and I talk about how great it was, and then we forget about it. And until we review it, we forget about these great cases.
Huh. That's right. Wow. I'm really looking forward to that. And there'll be a link on this website on Podcast UFO once that show goes live.
And it's actually going to be a week and a half away. Of course, we're going to record it before New Year's.
I see.
I'll be going to Denver then. So it'll be not this Monday, but the following Monday that we'll post that.
Uh-huh. All right. Well, excellent. Well, thanks so much, Alejandro. And thanks for all your hard work this year. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, my friend.
Actually, I'll be probably talking to you next week or not on this show. Are you you're going to be off in Denver or something, aren't you?
Oh, well, I will be around next Wednesday, so I can be on the show. And then you and I will talk on my podcast on Monday, hopefully. I've got David Marler to talk about the Farmington, New Mexico UFO sighting. So it's
great.
A really exciting one.
That's going to be a great show. All right, Alejandro, you have a good one.
You too. Talk to you soon.
All right, hang on, everyone. We'll be right back with Stan Gordon and John Ventre right after this music break. Hello, Stan Gordon and John Ventre. How are you guys doing?
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, very good, thanks.
I just learned tonight as I talked to you both, you guys live in the same town. How about that in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, that's unbelievable. We live about 3 miles apart, and I think Stan was the MUFON state director 3 different times for about 20 years. I've been the state director for 9 or 10 years now, and nearly all of our state directors have come out of Western PA.
Wow. One thing I want to say, there was someone trying to call during the news, and two different people were trying to call in, and that number is 603-967-4030. And you're welcome to call in a little bit later as we get along in the conversation. But anyway, now, John, you were on with Owen Eichler back, I think it was 3 weeks ago, wasn't it? Something like that?
Yeah, approximately.
And you had discussed, along with Owen, and many reasons why you both were thinking was the GE Mark II reentry vehicle. And I did get some information from a senior engineer that raised some questions. But Stan, I'm going to let you come in and bring up some points that you want to discuss about some conflicting thoughts on this situation. So go ahead, if you would, Stan.
Well, I'm not sure how many of your listeners are really familiar with the case. Do you want me to just give a really brief summary of the case for people who are listening?
Yeah, listeners that listened to 3 weeks ago, if you can do just a quick nutshell case on how that happened.
Okay, well, just very briefly, 4:47 p.m., the object is seen in the greater Pittsburgh area. It was initially reported seeing this brilliant fiery object from the tip of Ontario, Canada, over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And it was observed by a multitude of witnesses coming in over Pittsburgh and moving out into Westmoreland County. And as the reports were coming in, some people thought it was an aircraft that was on fire. So what happened was this object fell in a wooded ravine outside the little community of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, in Mount Pleasant Township, Westmoreland County. And what I found out during my 50 years of research on the case was that soon after it fell, some of the local people went down into the woods and came across this object. And then later, volunteer firemen, the Kecksburg firemen, because of reports coming in, they set up a search for a possible downed aircraft in the Kecksburg area. And various mutual aid fire departments responded to the incident. And one of those volunteer firemen was Jim Romansky. Jim Romansky was not from Kecksburg. He was from one of the volunteer fire companies, a small company outside of Lake Trope, PA. And when they got to the scene, they described setting up this, they were going to set up a grid search to search this large wooded area for what they thought was a possible downed aircraft. And Jim recalled, now I didn't meet Jim until 1987, just by sheer luck being in the right place at the right time, and we can talk about that as well. But anyhow, Jim was with these other volunteer firemen looking for a possible downed aircraft. He remembered how the various firemen were loaded into various trucks along the field, and they were going to walk up into this large wooded area, and they had walkie-talkies with them. And Jim told me, he said they were up in the area, and they weren't up that long when they heard a radio call from one of the other teams that they had found the crash site. So he hurried over with the small group that was with him, and there were several firemen on this little embankment, and they were standing there looking at this, what Jim called this huge acorn, that was only a few feet away from them. I mean, it was close enough they could have walked over and touched it. They were walking around looking at it. He said, to the best visibility, he would say he would estimate that what it was sticking out of the ground, he would estimate this thing was at least 10 to 12 feet or more in length, about 8 to 10 feet or more in diameter. He said a grown man could have easily stood up inside of the device and moved around inside of it. Now, the interesting thing is that Jim worked most of his life as a machinist and was very familiar with metals. And what he told me for years, from the time I met him, was he said when he looked at this object, It gave him the impression that was formed by pouring liquid metal into an acorn-shaped mold. He did not see any seams or rivet marks where it was joined together. It was just one big solid piece of metal. And on that raised up part of an acorn, you would have, he said that's what he called the bumper area. And he said it was on that part of the object that he saw what appeared to be symbols. And he recalled a number of different symbols from his memory best he could. Some were like zigzag lines, other type of broken lines, stars, circles, some other configurations. And, I mean, he was so intrigued by this that after it happened for years, he went to libraries and read books trying to look at ancient languages that would be similar. And he said the closest thing he could find were ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. But also there was another interesting detail which was not very well known. Only certain witnesses who were in a position to see it, where it was unobstructed, they reported seeing what appeared to be a rounded protuberance on the front of the object as well. So one of the first things we got to deal with is the fact that what the eyewitnesses are describing does not appear to be the GE Mark II, what it looks like compared to what witnesses described.
All right, John, do you have anything to say to that?
Yeah, I got a couple of things to say about that. First of all, when he says that it's 8 to 10 feet high, 8 to 10 feet wide, I dispute that because it was put on the back of a flatbed. Flatbeds were actually 6 inches less narrow than today. So the flatbeds were 7.5 feet wide. And I've talked to witnesses in Kecksburg and asked, did anybody see this object overlapping the sides of the flatbed? Because obviously, if it was 8 to 10 feet, you'd have a couple of feet sticking off the sides of the flatbed. And they have said, no, it didn't stick off the sides. And as a matter of fact, there were witnesses, let me find it, who said that it was looked the size of 2 suitcases. Ernie Hoffman said it looked the size of 2 suitcases. So, and let me make another point on this. Stan, the replica that's at Kecksburg, how big is that one up on the stand? Is that 8 to 10 feet?
Yeah, I really have to look. I haven't looked at measurement up for years and years when they built that. But let me tell you an interesting couple things that I can answer. One, I don't know who you talked to, but I talked to numerous witnesses who saw the object on the flatbed, on the military flatbed truck, and they did distinctly tell me that, yes, it would overlap and hung off the side of the flatbed trailer. The second thing you brought up is, one, you mentioned about Ernie Hoffman. Something over the years when I worked on this case, there was a lot of little details that I was coming up with, having interviewed hundreds of witnesses, that I didn't make public for a long, long time until I had more confirmation. What confirmation I had is this. There was not one military flatbed tractor-trailer truck. There were actually 2. The one truck, what people saw was the lower flatter, covered cargo was on the one that went out earlier that evening, and I know it went to the air base in Pittsburgh. The one with the object on went out around 1 o'clock in the morning, and we have good confirmation that it went from Kecksburg to Lockbourne Air Force Base near Columbus, Ohio. It was there under very heavy security. I interviewed one of the Air Force security police officers, and he told me how they brought that in. And this is interesting because more than one person has confirmed to me how they brought it into the base. They used an entrance not normally used. They backed into a hangar. They set up a security perimeter around the hangar, and they were given a shoot-to-kill order to anybody approach that hangar without the proper authority. And
okay.
So that's very interesting. But anyhow, and there was something else you brought up. Anyhow, I wanted to tell you a little story.
Wait. Don't get off this point yet, because I got a few more things to say about the size. One, I asked you in July, did it hang off the sides of the trailer, and you told me no. You were one of the people I asked. Now you're saying it did hang off the sides, so that doesn't jive.
When did you ask me that?
I asked you that right before the conference with all the witnesses. We were standing in the room.
That there were numerous witnesses who saw the fact that this thing hung over the side of the trailer. And
I dispute that point. But now, are you familiar with the picture from the Tribune Review that shows it laying on its side? I assume that's for the TV show Unsolved Mysteries. It's hanging up in the fire department. Are you familiar with that picture? It's in the UFO room.
yes.
And the lady that's standing there? Okay. Now, when you take that picture, and if that is the replica that's on the roof on the over there in Kecksburg, and if it's supposed to be 8 to 10 feet, that is laying on its side in a small ditch. I'm assuming the ditch was probably bigger than what you guys dug for the TV show. When you look at that, and you look at the picture of the GE Mark II, which was 6 feet by 6 feet, so you're saying this thing is 8 or 10 feet by 8 or 10 feet, and a woman is standing there, they look exactly the same on their side. You'd have to look at this picture because I put them side by side. They look exactly the same. And people's perception at night, because it's pitch black at this point, they're using flashlights, I assume, you're telling me that they can tell the difference between 6 feet and 8 feet when it's halfway buried in the ground. And I say that is nothing but human perception. And here's another point with Romansky, and I think this is really critical. His description of those symbols on the sides, he clearly said there was a 5-pointed star with a circle in the center, and an artist made a drawing rendition of Romansky's description of these symbols. The 5-pointed star with the circle in the center is absolutely 100% clearly an Air Force and Army symbol. You can look it up. That's what they use. That is a military symbol. And my other analogy is when we sent the Voyager space probe up and we put that gold plate on it to try to tell extraterrestrials where we're located in this universe, we showed our star as a little circle with straight rays of light coming from it. Why would an ET show a 5-pointed star with a circle in the center when that's our military symbol? So I think Romansky misidentified a lot of it.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm not saying it was extraterrestrial. I've said for years and years that there was a possibility this was a very advanced man-made space probe or possibly extraterrestrial. And there's a lot of information out there still, that I find very, very fascinating. But if John, if you look at the graphic that's on my website and you look at the symbols based on the best that Jim Romansky can remember years later of what some of the symbols look like, you see the star on it. Okay? Do you see a circle going around that star? And
No, there's an artist rendition out there that Romansky made with whoever this artist is. You can Google it. It's there. Matter of fact, if you just Google Kecksburg images, it's right there. It says artist rendition of what Romansky said, and you have it's actually more bullet pointed than acorn, the shape, and right on it in the center, 5-pointed star with a circle. And you even said a star with circles.
I didn't say star. I'm looking at that picture. It's on my website because I had that artist conception was done from the various symbols. So how do you explain all the other symbols in the row with that star? And, you tried to attribute the star, I believe, on a TV show recently in Pittsburgh, saying that it was an Air Force decal, Air Force marking, and that no witness was ever reported like an Air Force emblem, what you're trying to describe. But also I wanted to tell you a story. I was out at the scene when Jim Romansky came up, when the Unsolved Mysteries was setting up the ground scene of the object. I do not recall if the actual object was made actually to the specification on side. I don't remember that, but I can tell you this. I was there when Jim came out and he saw the thing, and he started running towards it, and he had tears in his eyes. He was extremely emotional over it. He said, my God, it was like going back years ago. That was 1990. He saw it in 1965. But I remember him saying to me, he said, now that I'm standing next to this thing, he said, the actual object was longer, but the part in the back he called the bumper area where the symbols were, he said, weren't as wide as what he saw on the replica.
Yeah, but I can tell you, laying on its side in that picture that was used as the replica, it looks exactly like the Mark II that's in a holder in a picture of this Mark II. Obviously wasn't flown. It's one that wasn't flown. Laying on its side, they both look exactly the same. And we're talking about a difference of 2 feet in size, yet I think we proved with the flatbed it couldn't have been more than 7 feet. And the Mark II was 6 by 6, and I'm saying the flatbed is 7 feet, so the thing wasn't 8 to 10 feet.
Well, again, you got to remember they're describing something big enough for a full-size man to stand up inside of, to move around. You look at the GE Mark II, and remember again what he's describing. He's saying this looked like it was poured into a liquid metal to an acorn-shaped mold. It did not have any rivets or weld marks. You can see that on the GE Mark II. It did not, you didn't see the separation like going up to the back where it was one solid piece of metal where he saw the raised up symbols. And there were numerous projects of the Soviets, of the U.S., that you could call somewhat acorn-shaped. There were quite a lot of them out there. But because something is similar, that doesn't mean that's what it is.
Okay, let me just say one thing about the rivets and the seams. There's 2 pictures. One, the one I sent you originally, is in that in our document. It shows one sitting straight up. In that, you see a seam, right, with rivets, and then you see a little porthole window. That's where the camera system was taking pictures. But it only had one seam. They can't send something up in space that has multiple seams on it. There was one seam on it on one side near the window where the pictures were taken. Obviously, that was laying face down because it wasn't seen. The other picture that shows it in the holding rack, the one I was referring to when it's on its side, you see absolutely no seams on that. So it had one seam, and it was a 50-50 chance that seam was laying face down.
I would like, again, there were witnesses that saw this thing moving very low over their head before it fell. Let me tell you this, Ron. There are multitudes of witnesses out there who have never come forward. Many of these people I interviewed over the last 30, 40 years, many of them, unfortunately, are now deceased. But there's a lot more information out there that a lot of people are aware of. There are so many witnesses I talked to who confirm other people's accounts. And again, there were certain people who reported seeing what appeared to be a rounded, extended protuberance on the front of the object, which clearly is not on the GE Mark II, for example.
Right. I don't know what that is, but that's not, part of the shape or the replica that was made. Right. But the point that you, Owen, and I think are making here also is we need somebody that was on the scene military-wise to come forward. One of those 30 Army, Air Force, NASA people, or somebody in a control room somewhere that they were tracking this. We need somebody to come forward and say what they saw. Now, when you think of Roswell, there were military people came forward. Battle of L.A., military people. Rendlesham, military people on the scene have spoken up. But not on this case. We need somebody to come forward, and I think this is going to give the publicity out there that somebody's going to come forward. As a matter of fact, this one guy put some information out there that he was working at Johnson Island out in the Pacific, and Owen is trying to contact this guy. I think his last name was Lemon. But he said he worked out there at that time. That's what we need. We need somebody to come out and say, yeah, I was on the scene. I was one of the Army officers with a machine gun holding people back, and this is what it was. And we don't have that.
Right. Well, I can tell you this. Over the years, I talked to a number of independent sources who were in a position to know that said that the object was indeed being tracked, which is how they were able to get the teams get them out there, get them on alert, starting moving towards the general area, not knowing exactly where it was going to come down, but they knew the general area where it was going to happen. But, John, I've got a few questions for you that I'm looking through your report, and, there's a couple things I want to ask you about. One thing, kind of interesting, in the report it talks about the fact that the object was being controlled and it was avoiding populated centers, so it's coming from Canada over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, but it comes right over the greater Pittsburgh area. Then it continues to move out over the city of Greensburg out in Westmoreland County, and then it proceeds out roughly towards Route 30 East, makes a turn to the south, and then it's seen by numerous people along those little farming communities out there, such as Marguerite and Norvelt. But then it continues through Kecksburg, passes very close to the area where it would later come down, but instead it continues out several miles to the mountains of Laurelville. Bill Bullybush was down in Mammoth, ran out on the road after he saw the object, and he said that it appeared to hesitate over the mountain. Then it changed direction, began to track back towards Kecksburg. There's witnesses all along that area. It made another turn, then dropped slowly down into that wooded ravine. And witnesses I interviewed said it came down almost like it made a controlled landing without any parachutes being reported. So that's one thing that's interesting because of the fact that there are apparently a number of different people now from the aerospace community who've been reading your report, and they're questioning the capability that the GE Mark II had in relation to the report. But something else I want to bring up, in the report, you talk about the fact that...
do you want me to comment? On that?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just hold up 1 second before we move on to another topic? This is exactly the same topic as the NASA engineer wanted me to speak about. So don't go on to another topic. If you would, go ahead and respond to that.
Yeah. I mean, all of those turns that the GE Mark II could not come to a stop and then turn another direction. It was made to, it was maneuverable to what they describe as a precise point. But I'm not saying it could land in my yard if they wanted it to. It was maneuverable by shifting weight inside of it, and then what's called the Coander effect. It would kind of skim along the heavier atmosphere, and they could make a turn. Now, the interesting thing, there's a map out there, and the path of it, if it never turned, was exactly over Pittsburgh. And you can pull that map up out there. There's a red line showing its path, and it looks like it would have hit Pittsburgh if it didn't change. And right around Cleveland, it did bear to the right, and then it bared back to the left after it passed Pittsburgh and ended up in Kecksburg. It would have been able to do that and then slow down by skimming along the air surface, which is what it was made to do. And if they wanted it to land in the rural area, they could do that. It could not stop, come back, make left turns, right turns. It could make these minimal turns to avoid, let's say, a population center like Pittsburgh. That's what it was capable of doing.
All right. Now, if I just wanted to talk, this is a contact I had from someone that went over the information, and he's a high-level senior engineer at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and he designed the cesium-ion engines for several space missions and has several instruments aboard the current MAVEN Mars orbital mission studying the atmospheres on the planet. And so he has all this background, and what his comment was, he said that the assertion that a re-entering satellite in a fireball plasma envelope could have received signals from the ground to change course is completely false because the plasma sheath generated by re-entry prevents it from receiving any signals. He said that even today we're absolutely out of contact with re-entering satellites and re-entry vehicles because of the plasma blackout. And his next comment was that even today re-entering vehicles do not maneuver because the energy requirements to do so during re-entry are far too great. That was the comments that he said.
Okay, well, I'd have to research that. I mean, I don't know anything about that other than the documents on this says that it was maneuverable to a precise location on Earth. I don't know if they make that maneuver at 50,000 feet or they make those maneuvers at 1,000 feet. But I'd have to research that because obviously I never heard that before.
Well, John, other than what Martin just said, there has been quite an interesting response from a number of people coming into different sources as well as on various blogs, people who are associated with the space community, aerospace field, who also have been reading the report, and they also have looked over this information, and they've come up with a lot of interesting details with the technical makeup of GE Mark II, which they believe does not explain what the Kecksburg object was. And there's a lot of information out there, and I'm not going to get into it all. I mean, there's a lot of it you'll probably be hearing about soon if you haven't already. I mean, I can bring up some of the points. Even Dave Rudiak was one of the gentlemen who brought some very interesting information up. In fact, he quoted and talked about an email he received from a retired NASA rocket scientist. And he said the GE Mark II nose cone was designed strictly for ICBMs for suborbital missions. Smaller Thor rocket of December 765 test from Johnson Island could not attain orbital speeds. Suborbital missions only lasted a short time. GE carried only a 1-hour battery supply. It did not have the capability to become a stable orbiting satellite, much less a maneuvering object, even if it could survive re-entry. That's just one of numerous inputs coming from people from the aerospace community who are looking into the data on the Mark II.
Okay, and I'll have to disagree with that because it says right here, Project 437 used Thor missiles and added booster engines to achieve orbital flights. 18 more suborbital and orbital Thor launches took place from Johnson Island during the 1964 to 75 period. So they were orbital at that time, and they used booster rockets to do it. And the other thing, too, is there were numerous other launches out of Vandenberg that were orbital and suborbital, and those records are out there. And you also have to look at what about other programs, black projects, secret programs that they don't even list in these logs. These logs were kept secret until 1991. So, one of the points I want to make, too, because I know we're getting close to the first hour here, is, Stan, do you believe the Air Force story that it was a meteor?
Definitely not.
Okay. Do you believe the Air Force story that there were only 3 people there at the site?
Of course not. I've talked to multitudes of witnesses, including reporters, and there was quite an interesting response by the military, Army and Air Force. And
okay, no, I just wanted a yes or no answer because I'm trying to make a point. Now, you also agree with me, I hope, that Project Blue Book, which was in force at that time under the Condon Commission, was doing everything they can to debunk UFO cases, redact information out of reports and everything, and gave the most ridiculous answers like a meteor, right?
Oh, definitely.
Okay, so then why, and this is, I almost find this comical when I have read those responses that are out there online, why do we believe the Air Force explanation, that it was suborbital, couldn't do this, couldn't do that? All they would have to do, and they kept this quiet for 26 years, 25 years, till 1991, if this was the Mark II, and they wanted to cover it up, all they needed to do was go to that log and put 3 letters, sub, in front of orbital, and for this December 7th launch, even though there were others that were clearly orbital and don't have an outcome. All they have to think about it. How could you cover this? Not put your other hat on. How could you cover this up if you're sitting in the control room with Dr. Condon and Vandenberg or whoever else, and they said, well, we can't tell the public this was a Mark II. It was going to hit Pittsburgh with a radioactive generator. What do? You will get Blue Book. Well, just say it was suborbital. When they look it up 25 years from now, people are going to say, look, suborbital, couldn't be it. I question the truth of any log that says the 7th launch was suborbital. But also there are plenty of other orbital launches that took place prior to the December 9th date. So even if it wasn't the 7th, it could be a different one. Matter of fact, there's one out there right now. The orbital launches came down between 2 days and 2 years. That was almost all of them. There's actually one that they say is still out there 50 years later that was launched back then. And a number of those don't have outcomes that they do say came down 2 days, 3 days, 6 months later. So, but, I look at it, what's funny, Stan, is that, you and I do UFO investigations. And we're always fighting the CIA, Blue Book, the cover-ups and everything. This one time in my life that I've written an article with Owen where I'm kind of on the other side now as a debunker, even though that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to put out a plausible explanation. I see the UFO community taking the same stance as the debunker. You know, they believe the Air Force information, yet when everything else about the story the Air Force told us is not true. It wasn't a meteor. They had more than 3 people. They redact all of the information. They deny everything, but yet we're going to believe the logs that they submitted 25 years later. So it's almost like a reversal of position here, where I'm getting it now the way I used to dish it out, with the ufologists. But we're believing the Air Force information when that is all they needed to do to cover this up, was say it was suborbital, as far as the December 7th, because that one clearly says it was didn't list an outcome other than the camera capsule going into the ocean.
Well, again, as Martin had mentioned from his source in the aerospace community, there is a number of other ones out there who have a lot of very detailed investigation research are doing on the Mark II, and I know we don't have time to get into it all, but they have some very interesting data which suggests that that is not what came down in Kecksburg. But I have another question for you, getting back to some of what you described. From your report in this, you're talking about, and I'm just going to part of the paragraph here, it talks about the trajectory control system to change the leading edge of the vehicle, thereby changing steering path of the vehicle. The vehicle then, in effect, can rise or fall or turn left or right. This in-flight capability was demonstrated by the object seen by many observers, and during the final moments of the event, when the re-entry vehicle landed in Kecksburg, an eyewitness, she remarked about seeing a 4-star object. The 4-star reference most likely was the 4 control jets used to steer the vehicle while in orbit and possibly used to change the descent speed. So my question is, John, when did you or Owen actually interview that eyewitness?
No, that's information that's out there, Frances Kalp. She was the first person that called it into the radio station. I think it was John Murphy's station or one of the other radio stations. She described it as a 4-pointed star. And the only reason we mentioned that was because she said it was a 4-pointed star. Those control jets were used in orbit out of space. They would have done probably nothing in low Earth atmosphere. But since she said there was a 4-pointed star, we know there were 4 control jets on this thing. So, but it really makes nothing about anything, because it wouldn't have. They may have been on, and that's what she saw. And I'm just trying to answer the Frances Kalp description, just like people said it glowed green, and that's why we explained that it had a copper alloy heat shield on it. That's the only reason we mentioned the 4-pointed star. If she had never said it was a 4-pointed star, because I think she's the only one maybe that said that, then we wouldn't have mentioned the 4 jets on it. But those jets were used in upper atmosphere orbit where it can control it. They controlled it on the way down by shifting the weight, as I had what we had explained.
Okay, well, first of all, John, it's very apparent in your report and the information you're having that a lot of the information you're describing came from my original investigation and articles. I interviewed that witness numerous times, but she, in fact, was not a witness to the object coming down. It was her young son. Her young son and his sister were out riding their bicycle that afternoon. Only he saw the fireball coming down in the distance, down in the woods. He ran home to tell his mother about it, and she contacted a neighbor, told her what happened. The kids decide they're going to run towards the woods to see what it was, and then the mother decides that it might be dangerous after talking to the neighbor and runs after the kids and stops them before they get anywhere near the site. But she, as well as others, saw, after the object had fallen, a column of blue smoke rising up out of the woods that dissipated very quickly. Now, I'm not for sure what she saw, but what she drew for me and what she described, she said was a 4-pointed star. It was above the smoke. So she was not an eyewitness seeing the thing falling from the sky to the ground.
Okay. Well, we said in the article that every single thing in that article can be found on the Internet, can be Googled. If you Google her, that's the information that's going to come up. But when she called it into the radio station, she said a 4-pointed star. Even if
No, she didn't.
Well,
she called in to John Murphy, was doing the evening news, the 6:30 news at WHJB Radio in Greensburg, and she called in to report to them because they were broadcasting about the sighting of the object. She called in to tell them that whatever that thing was that apparently fell not far from where they lived over in Kecksburg, John took all her information. He contacted the State Police Barracks at Greensburg, passed that on to them, and then he went out to Kecksburg himself. And there's one other thing that I'd like to ask you about, because you told me that you felt that this was a clincher for you, that the sketch that Jerry Betters, an eyewitness, drew of the object on the military flatbed tractor trailer looked so much like the Mark II reentry vehicle that you felt that was very important. So I wanted to know, when did you or Owen interview Jerry Betters personally?
Well, we didn't, because he died in 2007. But what's out there, the point we're making, is that this is, as far as I know, the only notarized statement that was made, this drawing. And when you look at the shape of it, it's exactly the same shape as the GE Mark II. It's exactly the same shape. So it's just a simple comparison of this being the notarized statement at the time and what this looks like. They look exactly the same. It wasn't more of a bullet shape. It wasn't Cosmos 96 that was maybe 6 feet wide and 12, 15 feet long. His drawing is exactly the same shape as the Mark II.
All right, so
when you look at the two, when you look at the two side by side, I think every party would look and say, "Wow, it's the same shape."
Okay. Well, I did many interviews as well as some of my investigators with Jerry Betters. Can you tell me where Jerry Betters was positioned in relation to the military flatbed tractor trailer where he saw the object on it?
I don't remember all the details as far as where he was.
Okay, well, it's important detail.
I don't know if it was on the road. I don't know exactly where, but get it.
Jerry Betters and his friends were in a car. They were on the dirt lane, the dirt road. They were coming up on the road, and there were some soldiers and other people on that roadway, and he and them noticed way down through the field, way down over the hill, there's this large military flatbed tractor trailer truck in the distance, and he said that he saw, and he described this in detail, what this thing looked like, the best that he could recall, best he could see from that distance, and there was a tarp over it, but the tarp was not completely covered for some reason. It was somewhat open, which gave him a view of the object. So Jerry's description is interesting, and he confirms what other people saw, but he was much further away to give any great detail. And unfortunately, Jerry, like myself, didn't have a lot of great artistic ability, and Jerry was trying to draw kind of the acorn shape with a raised-up back with the symbols on it that he saw, but the drawing he has looks somewhat similar to the GE product, but he could only do it to the best of his ability to try to give an idea of what he observed.
Yeah, and that's the problem with a lot of the witness testimony. I mean, if you just look at what people describe, like I said, Ernie Hoffman said it was small. It was the size of 2 suitcases. Other people, you're saying, says it's 10, 12 feet tall. That's the problem with human perception, and it's nighttime. So, and I'm sure also Jerry Betters wasn't an aerospace person and wasn't familiar with what Mark IIs look like, because they were secret at the time. But in a courtroom, you would take this notarized deposition, put it out, take a picture of the Mark II, put it out, and show it to the jury, and they would look at it and say, "Wow, that's the same. It's very similar."
And I would also bet you that an attorney in that courtroom would hand the pencil to Jerry and tell him to try to draw the object again, and I would bet you that he's going to show the fact that he's just not a very good artist like myself.
Yeah, well, the other thing, too, in July when you had the 50th anniversary, depending on when they asked Jerry to pencil that, I noticed clearly this past July that, these people are 75, 80 years old now. Their memories were not that great. Because if you remember, I raised my hand and I said, wait a second, some of you said this thing glowed green. The cover of your DVD says it glowed green. Your DVD says it glows green. Now, one of them, they looked at me with, like and they didn't remember it glowing green. None of them, not one, even the people in your DVD who said it glowed green. So that's a problem with 50 years later and asking people to reconfirm things. You know, I didn't want to pick on them, you know, because I'm trained in interviews, interrogations. I was the head of security. I just backed away. If you remember, I left the conference after 2 questions because I didn't want to seem like I was picking on the witnesses.
Well, John, I can tell you, there are many witnesses you're not aware of, but also if you looked at that video again, and I will agree with you, yes, that's why I recorded a lot of this data 30, 40 years ago, because many witnesses were already in age at that time, and now a lot of them are 80, 90, many are deceased, and yes, unfortunately, they're beginning to forget and get certain details confused. But even Randy Overly, that's on my video, he was in Norvelt several miles before the object fell. He watched this object as it approached him in the distance. It passed no more than about 200 feet overhead. He gave a good description of this object, that he saw the object within the flames. He did see green flames, but he saw other color flames as well. And other people, many who you're not aware of, also described seeing this. And, of course, you know, after the object fell, it was mainly like a blue arcing that was reported down in the woods by different people.
Yeah, I mean, that is the same as what Owen saw it over in Shafton, and he described it just like you said, this Overly guy described it, glowing green, but other colors coming off of it. But that's why I would say your 1998 DVD, because it was done in 98 and not in 2015, like the 50th anniversary, that testimony is better than what you're going to get right now. And that's why I was a little disappointed, actually, in July, because some of the things they said in your DVD they weren't saying now. And I attribute that to just memory, because most of these people are around 80 years old. You know,
and I agree 100%, and that's why I documented this years and years ago to keep it for historical sake, what they told me back then.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, and I watched your DVD a couple of times, and, you know, but even on that DVD, you see different descriptions. You know, Ernie Hoffman saying it was small, the size of 2 suitcases. Other people saying it was, you know, so nighttime, human perception, who knows? But, you know, the bottom line with this is we know the military lied. They lied about just about every aspect of it they lied about. So, you know, we need somebody to come forward. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't a Mark II, but it was a Mark VIII. You know, maybe it was some other program that they were working on. You know, we've discussed the Nazi Bell, right? We know that those records were there in 1945. This is 20 years later. I don't know. Could it have been? But the question I have is, we know aerodynamically to come down the way it did, it pretty much has to be the same height and width. You know, 6 feet by 6 feet, 8 feet by 8 feet. That's the only way it could maneuver based on what happened that day. It couldn't be Cosmos 96 because that would have tumbled and burned up and fall apart like it did over Canada. So the Nazi Bell was it wasn't wide enough at the base. It was more of a barrel-shaped, the Nazi Bell, you know. But we don't know that the Nazi, you and I have talked about this, we don't know that it's ever been put into use. But my question would be, too, with the Nazi Bell, it was meant to be a time distortion weapon. So why would it be miles up in space?
Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't make any sense. The Cosmos 96 and the Nazi Bell don't make any sense.
There have been many. When your report came out, really, it wasn't anything really new to me, because for years and years, many people have come to me telling me that they knew the origin of what the object was, and they were all different. I mean, it went from originally hearing from a family at Kecksburg, an Air Force officer interviewed, told them a Gemini capsule was expelled in the area. Of course, that was not the case. Another one was a guy said he knew for sure it was a Soviet ICBM that went out of control. It goes on and on and on, but the point is, while there may be some similarities to what was seen, there's no evidence in any of these theories that they have any definitive connection to the Kecksburg incident.
Well, it's not proven. You know, it's a theory. And, you know, as we publish the paper I sent you months ago, you know, I've added to it. Now it's a little bit different, et cetera. Even the one that was in the MUFON Journal, we've added to and it's developed. But it's a theory. Yes, we don't have a definitive yes, that this is it, because that would have to come from really the Air Force, because it wasn't a NASA project. And I even say, Leslie Keane and the Sci-Fi Channel, they sued NASA. NASA claims they turned everything over but lost the main box of evidence. So what are they going to do? Even if there was the Mark II, is a NASA spokesman going to come forward and say, yeah, that's right, Ventre got it right. We knew all along that's what it was. Oh, you did. So then you lied to the federal court and didn't say that, whatever that was 10 years ago in the lawsuit. They're not going to confirm it. They're not going to confirm or deny, because at this point they can't. So we need somebody that was there on the scene as a military person.
Right.
Okay,
well,
hang on just 1 second, please. We're right at the top of the hour, and this is where I'm going to break the show, but I'm not going to run music, and I'm just going to say that you can keep talking here. That's fine for a little while longer if you'd like, but the main thing is there were two people that tried to call in. If you're still listening live, feel free to call in with your questions. And that's 603-967-4030. It sounds, the way this is going, that perhaps there is a middle ground. John, you seem open to the idea that this doesn't have to be a case closed. It could be just more of a possibility.
We threw it up as a theory, obviously. We don't have a 100% on this. And we concluded our article saying we need somebody to come forward to confirm it. But like I said, it's not going to be NASA or the Air Force. It's got to be somebody that was there. But I think we can knock out really all the explanations other than it was a UFO or some type of military man-made project. And the only one we know of that isn't secret, was secret for 25 years, was this Mark II. It really, really matches up in a lot of ways.
There's one other thing.
I think it matches up.
John, there's one other thing that I remembered that Owen mentioned. He thought that the object was taken and just buried somewhere. And Stan, I heard you say that some people saw it actually drive into a hangar, and then there was a shoot-to-kill ordinance and all that.
Oh, yeah. That's very well documented, because we have a number of people, including a fairly new witness I've been working with the last several weeks, which is a military source. But anyhow, there's no doubt that the object went out around 1 o'clock in the morning. And, John mentioned again earlier about Ernie Hoffman. Again, I want to point out, we have good confirmation there were two military flatbed tractor trailer trucks at the scene. The one with the longer, lower cargo on, likely Ernie saw, went out earlier that evening, went to the air base in Pittsburgh. The object went out around 1 o'clock in the morning. It was taken with a small convoy. They went into Lockbourne Air Force Base. I interviewed one of the Air Force security police who was involved with the security team. He didn't know, but another witness also confirmed that story to me. Now, I have another person give me good information confirming the story as well. He said he didn't stay on the team that long. He heard it continued on to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and then later other witnesses confirmed to me exactly what building they took to at Wright-Patterson. It was not Hangar 18. It was another warehouse building.
I'm sure they took it somewhere, even if... if it was the Mark II or it was a UFO or whatever it was, they obviously took it to an Air Force base. The one thing we do know for certainty that both you and I will agree on that point, but we'll agree on is it couldn't be a meteor, because they wouldn't have shown up in force to take a meteor out. And show me one other meteor that they did this same scenario for under Project Moondust, but yet that is the official government explanation. It was a meteor. So how can we believe anything that they say about this case or any other that was unexplained?
John, if this was the GE Mark II, how could this thing come down through the trees, knock the trees over, come down, make what some people said looked like almost a belly landing, like a soft landing, without any parachutes? And, of course, there was no major crater at the scene reported. And it was completely packed.
It came down bottom first, and it would have skidded along the ground and crashed through the trees. I think it very well could do exactly that, and then it laid on its side when it came down.
Well, I can tell you there's a number of people out there in the aerospace field who is looking at a lot of data on the GE Mark II, and they disagree with what you're saying.
All right. Well, I mean, like I said, we need somebody, and we've never had anybody that was actually a military person there on the scene or in a control room come forward and tell the truth like in a lot of other cases. But this is a theory, and, you know, if it's not, like I think I've said on a lot of shows, I'm 95% convinced, I'm 98% convinced, could it be this? I think it is. And could it be a UFO? It could be. Could it be some other project? It could be. But this is one that was kept quiet till 1991. And you had to actually find these documents in textbooks and different places, which Owen did do. So, I think we're down to two theories on this. I really do. And I think people have to just look at the pictures, look at it, and say, well, okay, it could be this one. Or, no, I believe it was a UFO because somebody else said they saw a hand come out of it or whatever at the hangar. So, I think it's down to those two, and that's it.
And that's we're down to the two theories I talked about years and years ago. We're still in the same position that some object of still undetermined origin fell at Kecksburg in 1965.
Well, I feel like this is getting about wrapped up, but I do want to talk about the hand that people saw. How many people or witnesses, Stan, that you talked to said something about beings?
Okay, well, it's a really a long, detailed story. It's two people, but you've got to hear the details. But there's some interesting little details that are not very well known about what happened at the scene. And, this is not Roswell where there's bodies laying around. I heard for years and years there were rumors around there that some bodies were found, and I always consider them rumors. I never found anything to substantiate those claims, but some interesting things happened. But it'll take a few minutes to tell the story if you'd like me to do it.
John, do you have the time?
Yeah, I'll stay on. I mean, I'm just basically here in my hotel room.
Yeah, right, sure. Go ahead, Stan.
Okay, so anyhow, when Unsolved Mysteries show aired in 1990, there was a huge amount of new information that came forth on the case. I was receiving information from people who had moved away from this area, had lived there in 1965. I was getting information from military sources, from anonymous sources, all kind of very interesting information coming in. One particular call I got was from a fella. His name was Myron. He's now deceased. He was a truck driver from Ohio, and he said to me, now that it's on TV, I guess I'm allowed to talk about it. And I said, Myron, what are you talking about? And he went into great detail, and he told me how that he and another truck driver, within, I believe it was 2 or 3 days after the object fell in Pennsylvania, that a Navy officer came to this big supply house in Ohio and ordered a large supply of a special type of glazed engineering brick to be shipped to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Now, the second truck driver, initially, he really didn't want to talk to anybody. And who got involved with this very deeply with me was the late Len Stringfield. And you probably recognize his name. He was the pioneer of UFO crash retrievals from Ohio. He did a lot of investigation with me on this case as well. And anyhow, the second truck driver initially would not talk about it, but later he did talk to Len and myself that confirmed the story. He had taken the first load of bricks. They were escorted into the base, to this warehouse building, and he said when he got there that the flatbed trailer with the object with a tarp over it was outside, sitting outside of the warehouse building. The next day, he and Myron returned to the base. They were escorted in. They were told, just do your job, don't be looking around. And when they got there, the trailer was still there. The object was gone, but the tarp was laying over the trailer. As the day goes on, there's these fellas in white coveralls with sidearms and, I believe, rubber gloves and rubber boots. They're going in and out of this building, and Myron was curious as to what was going on. And when he didn't see anybody around, he ran over and looked inside the entrance of the warehouse. And he was told me in detail how the lighting was not real good, but you could see in there was like a parachute hanging from the ceiling, kind of like trying to conceal the object, which was up on scaffolding. And they had ladders going up, and they apparently were trying to open this thing up. And he described in detail, I mean, the size and dimension he gave was very similar to what Chirmansky said it was out at Kecksburg. He saw the hieroglyphic symbols on it, the markings. He said it looked similar to that as well. And anyhow, at some point, he was caught. I'm just shortening the story. He was caught, and he was told, forget about everything you've seen. If you talk about it, we're going to throw you in jail and throw away the keys, but in 20 years, this will all be public knowledge. So that was the interesting story. So anyhow, in 1996, when I'm filming my documentary, Kecksburg, The Untold Story, I go to visit Myron to interview him. Myron is in bad health. Unfortunately, he has passed away. And when we got there, he said to me and the crew, he said, I have something else to tell you that I didn't bring up before. And he said, I talked to my son about it the night before, and he said, why are you going to even tell him the story? And he said, because I may not be here the next day. And he went on to tell me that when he went inside the warehouse building, there was like a workbench. And he said on that workbench, there was a body, but it was covered with a white sheet. He estimated it weighed maybe about 80 pounds. I believe he said it was around maybe 4.5, 5 feet tall. But he said all he could see was the left arm hanging down off the table. He could see 3 fingers, and the skin looked lizard-like. That's all he could describe. I tried many times to get him to try to change the story. He said, that's all I could see. That's all I could see. Well, it was an interesting story, and the way he came across, I believe he saw what he saw, but it didn't mean much. So in November of 2000, and excuse me, we got to drink water, excuse me.
Sure.
In 2002, you might recall the Sci-Fi Channel launched their UFO advocacy initiative, and they formed a group called the Coalition for Freedom of Information, and that was headed by Leslie Kane, who was appointed Director of Investigations. And anyhow, as that was becoming quite a lot of interest, and there was a lot of media coverage on it, especially here in this area, I had a whole list of names of people who were willing to come forward to talk, give me some detail about what they experienced or information they had on Kecksburg. There was one particular name on it. I'll call this fellow Joel. His name, at that time, had come to my attention, I think it was like around 13 years before. The information we had was that when he had snuck down into the woods, which other people did, the military did not know, and he apparently was hiding down the woods and was watching the military recovery of the object. They went into great detail. So anyhow, his name's on the list. I call him on the phone, and I talk to him about it, and I make an appointment to get out there as soon as I could. Well, I should go back a little further. When I called him 13 years before, and I heard about this and what his experience was, he didn't deny it. He just said to me, my family doesn't want me involved, and I'm afraid the government might come after me if I talk about what I saw. So that was it until his name shows up again. So I go out to interview him, and when I got there, he's up in age. He's seemed a little nervous, and he said I was going to cancel the appointment because I'm still reluctant to get involved. But we sat there for a few minutes, and we just talked in general about the case and got a little friendly. He said, well, now that you're here, I might as well tell you some of my story. That led to numerous other interviews, but just to make it very short, he told me how he had heard on the news that where the thing had come down. He knew the area like many other people because he hunted down there. He went out there with his brother, and he told his brother, I'm going to get down the woods and see if I can find that thing. And his brother said he wasn't going to go with him. He had a flashlight, but he told me he really didn't use it. He went down along one area along the wood line that he knew, and he saw like electrical arcing in the woods, which other people described, and that's how he found the location. And he was able to tell me how it was positioned and various other features about it. And he told me how he kept putting tree branches around him to hide himself. He kept moving back further into the woods because he said as he's getting down there, he said he begins to see people in civilian clothes coming in. They could have been locals. They could have been volunteer firemen. And then he said soon after, he begins to see the military coming in, which he had been in the military. He knew Army and Air Force. And he said one other thing that always it kind of fascinated me. I believe it was more than one, but he focused on this one individual who was down in the woods. And he kept saying to me, he said, I didn't know if he was a congressman or a senator, but he was indicating, he said, I don't know why a politician would be down in the woods. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, yeah, he was in a dressed black suit, he had a black tie and a fancy hat, he had a camera, and he was telling the military what to do. And he was taking all kind of pictures, he said, of the broken trees, of the object on the ground. He said he was too far away to see, but there was something, maybe like tracks on the ground around the object. He said, I couldn't tell if they were deer tracks or something else. I'm too far away, but he was taking a lot of pictures of them. And anyhow, he goes on to tell me how, while he's there, an Army officer jumps on top of that object. And he says he has a long metal rod. He said something like a policeman's billy club. And he said, and at this point, he gets very emotional, and you can just see there's something he's going to say it's going to bother him. And he said, I swear to God, sir, there was something inside of that thing. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, that officer struck the surface of that object with that metal rod. And he said, moments later, on the front of the object, a hatch opened from right to left, and he said, and I have to get back to that report. I believe so. Like some unusual light came up out of it, and he heard this whirling sound, and all he could see was this very long. He said it looked almost like an elastic arm, something like, he said, some kind of material his kids used to play with when they were little. And he said all I could see were like the two fingers around it from where I was. He said I had to keep going further back, and he said moments later you could hear this metal on metal hitting when the hatch closed. He said there had to be another arm, but from where I was positioned I couldn't see it. And he said at that point the officer started screaming, hurry up, we don't have much time. And all these soldiers came over. They began to clear the debris around the object. He went into great detail of how they used metal strapping, how they had to winch this thing over to the flatbed because you couldn't take the trucks right down to the impact site. So you listen to that story, and you listen to Myron, and then, for example, you got Bill Weaver, who was a very reputable witness. Bill was a teenager at the time. He heard on the radio that the object had fallen over on Kecksburg. He went over that afternoon. It was in his dad's car, and he found himself on that dirt road that a lot of people were on. But what a lot of people know, hundreds of people that night were up on top of the hill in the distance, way on the opposite side of the woods. But most of the military activity was taking place over on the dirt road. And anyhow, while he was there, a big white panel truck pulls up. And out of that panel truck are four men in what he called moon suits. And they had a box-shaped device, maybe 4x5 square, on a stretcher-like device, and they carried it down towards the ravine where the object fell. Now, I was told later by another witness there may have been two of these boxes. Now, the boxes are too small to put the object in, so what were they going to put in those containers? And then I do have in my files reports from years ago from, I know at least one, I think there were two different witnesses told me that they were on the scene that night. They saw in the distance soldiers carrying something on a stretcher, but they were too far away to see what it was. So when you put these little details together, you begin to wonder if there was more to this than meets the eye. And again, I'm not saying that this was extraterrestrial or alien bodies. And there's all kind of speculation if this is true. You know, another point of speculation on my part is, could this have been a human passenger where there was some type of accident, let's say a fire inside the capsule, and it gave the skin that impression of being along that line? So I don't have the answers, but I keep an open mind to all possibilities until we have that definitive conclusion.
Yeah, and we kind of surmise with, sticking with the Mark II, what could have happened. And this is even an interesting storyline, Stan, if it was the Mark II that Owen and I believe, is that the orbital launched ones, the early ones used batteries, but the orbital launched ones used an atomic generator. And when you look at the map, that was the way it was coming, and it was a polar launch of these. So it was sent from Johnson Island south over Antarctica. It would come around over the North Pole and then take pictures over Russia, and it would circle like that. So when you see the description of this coming in, it was coming in over Canada. That matches up with the type of orbit this had, if it went offline, obviously. But it was coming straight at Pittsburgh. And, and I'm kind of surmising atomic generator, it's coming at Pittsburgh. I mean, can you imagine it hitting the U.S. Steel building? It's radioactive. So what we're thinking, when it turned there, it moved away from Pittsburgh and it made another turn to land in a rural area. is when it finally landed. And your description of the 4 NASA guys in radiation suits carrying a box, why couldn't that box be to remove that atomic generator that was in there? They couldn't allow that thing to be leaking radiation all over, Mount Pleasant Road or Route 31 onto the Turnpike. It had to come out. So we're thinking that that's a possibility. But one of the questions I got, because we're surmising about that, is, Stan, have you ever looked into any of the hospital records, medical records, of any sort of deformities, anything that occurred in the general vicinity after Kecksburg? Because I got something to add about that, but that's my question to you.
Yeah, for years and years, we looked for all kind of records. In fact, I'm trying to think, it was the newspaper, I believe it was John Murphy actually went to the hospitals, and they had no records from that time period of anybody coming in with any radiation-type burns. But we looked for records from the 9/11 Center, from the airports, from many, many different agencies. And unfortunately, the records that probably did exist at the time have long since been destroyed.
Yeah. Here's one of the things that Owen has come up with, and it's interesting, is he found 2 cases of, I think he said endocephaly, not hydrocephaly, where the brain, fluid increases the size of the skull. Endocephaly, I think it's what it's called. It's like 1 out of 220 people is what happened in that area, because it was 2 cases, and I think there were 480 people living in that area at the time. But he's found 2 cases of that, and that's caused by radiation. And it's the same thing that you're finding out in the West Coast now, increases in California, Oregon, along the West Coast there. I think it's called endocephaly, where the skull doesn't form completely, and the kids end up passing away.
Okay. And again, a lot of this, both of us, we have pros and cons on the case. There's many unanswered questions. We could speculate forever. I can tell you, in the mid-1980s, when we discovered the crash site, independently taken this to by 3 different people separately, that several of my research people, and we had, in fact, interestingly, my first research group, a number of our field investigators were trained by the Civil Defense as radiological monitors, and we had some pretty good radiof equipment back in those days. And we checked their area for radiation, and it was all just normal background radiation at that time.
How much after the crash did you check the radiation?
Mid-1980s.
1980s, because some of the items that Owen described in the paper had half-lives. One of the elements was like 286 days. I don't remember what the other one was. So it wasn't, these weren't nuclear reactors like today. What they used back then, it's like the atomic bomb. They blew the atomic bomb up over Nagasaki and Hiroshima, but then they rebuilt it right afterwards. And people live there now. It wasn't like a nuclear that you would be radioactive for 100 years. It was totally different, atomic compared to nuclear. But it's all interesting.
Right. Well, I just say we need to keep an open mind until we have the definitive evidence as to what this thing was.
Well, we're hoping that somebody comes forward. This has actually gotten a ton of, I'm not out there searching this because, I'm technically the UFO guy from Pennsylvania with the MUFON, and I told Owen, if you gave me a really good story that made sense, I would put it out there for him. But he's reading a lot online, and this story is all over the place now. Kecksburg has all of a sudden gotten a ton of attention. I know it's out on military sites, Stars and Stripes, other people that Owen knows that live in other states are contacting him and said, we saw the story on this other site. So you hope that somebody that was there will come forward. And, if the government says something, there's always that question mark. Can you believe them? Is this the truth this time? But, I'd like to see one of those 30 or so military officers, people that were there, come forward, because we don't have one right now like a lot of the other cases.
Well, I can tell you, recently I was on the Coast to Coast radio show talking about this, and a caller called in, and I've been in touch with him now, and he appears to, from the information I have at this point, he gave me some very good details, including some details not widely known, which seem to confirm that he was a part of the military on the scene that night. So I've been in the middle of talking with him.
Wow.
Well, that's interesting. And then, like I said, Owen's got this guy that worked at Johnson Island. So, it's interesting what else will come out. And that'd be cool if we get some other additional information 50 years later.
Well, John, sounds like we're about the end of your time on the show, and I want to thank you so much for coming on and answering some questions.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. No problem.
All right. So we're going to continue on. Thank you, John, and have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Okay, you too. I'll be back actually tomorrow. It's suspended with my son and his wife, but I'm in Florida right now, and the weather sucks.
All right.
Again.
All right. You take care, John.
Thanks.
All right, Stan, you can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for that. A lot of interesting points. And, who knows if it's one of these things that are going to get definitely solved or not. But I think that is interesting that someone called coast to coast and you're communicating with that person. Also, when I had the show recently on with both John and Owen, I did get an email from someone that said his father worked on the GE Mark II and but his father had passed away, so I don't think it was going to go anywhere. But when you're on a show like that, you do get, you do get some witnesses come out. I think that's great exposure on that show for one.
Right. I did want to make one other point, if it's all right to comment on it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Sure. Now, one thing we didn't get into, as when Leslie Kane was involved with the Sci-Fi Channel investigation, and they were doing quite an elaborate research project to try to find answers to what the object was that's found near Kecksburg. And part of that research, in which she published this information, by the way, in the October 2005 IUR very detailed investigation report on the Kecksburg incident. But in 2003, Leslie Kane conducted a series of interviews with Nicholas L. Johnson, chief scientist for orbital debris at NASA Johnson Space Center. And Johnson is recognized internationally as a leading authority on orbital debris and foreign space systems. And one thing he did, for many years, one of the main possibilities we looked into of an object that may have been the answer to Kecksburg was Cosmos 96. Cosmos 96 was a Soviet Venus probe that had a technical malfunction and re-entered the Earth's atmosphere at 3:18 a.m. over Canada, interestingly on the same date. But over the years, a lot of information has surfaced which pretty much eliminates Cosmos 96, and in fact, information that Johnson looked into, he was pretty much able to eliminate Cosmos 96 as the object that found near Kecksburg. But according to Kane, Nicholas Johnson also told her that Cosmos 96 was the only cataloged object that re-entered the Earth's atmosphere on December 9th, and that no other man-made object from any country came down that day. He explained to her that anything not cataloged would have been so small it would not have survived re-entry, and anything larger would have been detected. Kane also quoted Johnson as saying, "I cannot absolutely confirm that it was not some completely unreported event, but the chances of that are virtually nil." He said, "You can't launch something without somebody seeing it." By 1965, the U.S. and Soviets were both reporting their launches. So you can go to the IUR story. It's online, or there's a link to it on my website. They can read the whole story. But also, as part of that report, Johnson also looked at the recently declassified CIA data concerning the dropping of film canisters from the secret reconnaissance satellite missions during the time period. By checking the launch and retrieval times, he determined that there was no secret mission that could have led to an inadvertent reentry of a capsule that day. So, again, that's very, very interesting.
Wow. Now, I heard that the Russian, I'm sorry, I can't remember what you called that vehicle.
Cosmos 96.
Yeah, that it had a different type of shape. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, and it was only about 3 feet in diameter, much smaller than what people described at the scene.
I know we're not going to stay on Kecksburg long here, but, when you described that one witness that talked about all the different turns, it really so puzzling in that it fell at a slow speed. I mean, and then along with what you talked about with the people describing the being or beings or whatever, that is just a real mystery.
There is so much more to this story than people know. There's certain details I'm still haven't released because I'm hoping still to get confirmation on it. And, when this information began to come out of this possible body or whatever it was inside the object, I was very interested in it, but also very skeptical. But as more and more little pieces fit together, it became more interesting. And in the last couple years, I've gotten some other details now from other people, all different people. Everybody is reluctant to talk about. I mean, I have no doubt that I know that there are people out there, even in recent months I learned of, who still 50 years later may have information on this, and they still will not talk about it.
Wow, that's crazy. So anyway, I guess the whole thing with you and John is you can agree to disagree, and maybe something or someone will come forward that eventually will, but for now it's still just a plain mystery.
Yes, I have no doubt. Like I said, I've always kept an open mind, and I hope someday we have that really definitive proof that we can figure out once and for all what the object was that fell near Kecksburg in 1965. Well,
I think there's two things that is causing all the press on this right now. One is, of course, the article from John and Owen, and then also the 50th anniversary. Plus, you've written a couple of articles about it.
Yeah, and of course, I do have the one article on my website, stangordon.info, people can read, where it goes into some of the information we talked about tonight. But, I don't think I really mentioned this. I don't think we had a chance, but when I talked to Jim Romansky, after John's report came out, I called Jim Romansky. He was that fireman who stood very close to the object at night, who had been the machinist for years and years. And I contacted him on October 7th, and I asked him if he heard about this new theory that had come out, and he had not. And I asked Jim to take a look at the picture of the GE Mark II, and I asked him for his comments. And when I called him, his comments were not even close, no comparison. You can see it's man-made and constructed. He told me again the object he saw was not constructed like this. He stated that what he saw looked like one piece of metal, looked like it was forged using liquid metal and poured into an acorn-shaped mold. He said, this thing you could not stand up inside of, the acorn you could. He said that the acorn-shaped object he saw was at least twice as big, if not bigger, than the object he saw in the photo.
Okay, so this thing, I heard you say this thing looked like a molded piece and all that. Is there anything that you're aware of in all your research that is a man-made object that is poured into a mold like that?
I have never seen anything that I, come across that confirmed anything that I'm aware of that was flying. I've heard speculation there may be something out there, but I'm not familiar with anything of any great detail of any of these type of projects. Almost everything that I've seen and talked to a lot of people, over the years who worked in the space program, engineers and scientists over the years I met, and when I talked to them about the fact that what witnesses saw it, how this thing maneuvered and all, they all scratched their heads. Everything that I recall ever seeing in the museums and talking to a lot of people, you could see that they were constructed. There was a lot of rivets and weld marks and seams.
Right, yeah. And that, not to go into any type of conspiracy or anything, but you do often hear about when people see a UFO that they see no seam or, it seems perfectly smooth. I have heard that a lot. Again, I'm not saying that this thing was extraterrestrial, but that is another thing you do hear.
Oh, yeah. And, again, there's so many unanswered questions. I mean, we've learned a lot about the case. There are many unanswered questions, and, hopefully someday we'll have some answers.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's skip along to other subjects. Now, you and I have had a conversation, and this change of the live show over to my new website my new website player, and no more live shows on the Dark Matter digital network kind of threw me for a loop. But I am starting another show, and now that I have this live feed, I can do it live. And you're going to be one of the guests, and we're going to be talking about cryptoids. So it's going to be a whole different subject. Another show I'm going to do. All the subjects going to be different subjects other than UFOs. I almost should call it the other show.
And one of my go ahead.
And that will be. I hope to have that figured out sometime in January, and you and I will talk and set up a time. I do have someone calling in right now. Hang on, just one moment.
Sure.
Hello, caller.
Hello, it's Ray Stanford.
Hey, Ray. How are you, Ray?
Well, I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm well. And, Ray, you probably know Stan, don't you?
Oh, I sure do.
Yeah.
Hi, Ray. How are you? I haven't heard your voice for quite a long time.
Yeah, hi, Stan. Good to hear from you. I want to commend your objectivity on this, and I wanted to add a few facts. I know very well, in fact, 4 and 5 times a week, my wife and I at Goddard Space Flight Center have lunch with the high-level engineer that Martin has been talking about, and I want to say that when he told us that, he said, look, if that thing maneuvered as the reports say, he said, and I've never heard this engineer as emphatic about anything. He actually put his fist on the table and kind of banged it and said, that thing was not a re-entering satellite. It absolutely could not. He said, there's absolutely no way that they could maneuver that thing in the course of a re-entry once it enters even the upper atmosphere. There's just not enough energy there, and he's very emphatic, and he said, if that report is true, you can be sure that it was something else. I want to say another thing, too, that I think is interesting. John Ventre was repeatedly mentioned that there was a military Army star with a circle around it on the rim of this object. All right, let's for a moment suppose that there had been as some people have felt that they saw, but there's a problem there. I'd wonder if he's ever asked himself, now, was it painted on there? Was it embossed, or was it engraved? Was it raised up, or was it engraved into the surface? This is an important question. Let me say that quite some years ago, my wife and I and my children were at Goddard Space Flight Center having a conversation with James Lovell, who, of course, was on Apollo 13, ill-fated Apollo 13, but he also had earlier been on a Gemini mission. And we were standing there with him discussing, as he let his memory go back to the past, as he said, the Gemini capsule that he had actually flown in. And at one point, he had his hand on the very outermost edge of this thing. And I said, tell me, how hot do you suppose that thing got during your reentry? Now, I don't remember the figure he gave, but it was terrible. There's an incredible amount of heat. And let me say this. If this object had a star, with or without a circle around it, on the edge of it, it was not painted on. The paint would never have continued to exist. Now, if it were engraved, or it was embossed or raised up somewhat, I can practically assure you that it was not a secret. It was not, for example, the GE Mark II, and it was not a government device. The amount of ablation and temperature around that edge would have completely removed this. If the account is true, then I think that in itself is pretty good evidence that it was something that came from somewhere else. I've never had an opinion about Kecksburg. I've never gotten into it enough to make up my mind. But when I hear this kind of thing, all I can say is that if that report was true about these things on the side of it, it's not paint, and if they had engraved it on a government, you'll never see, I don't believe, a government spacecraft, a reentry vehicle, or even one that wasn't intended to make a reentry, that's going to have something engraved or embossed on its surface, because this sets up micro phenomena in the plasma as it passes through the atmosphere, and you're going to get tremendous instabilities and burning, uneven burning, because of these markings. If it was on a vehicle, it was probably flush with the surface and something completely beyond us. And again, that would suggest to me that it was from somewhere else. I have no idea where, and I don't even think about it. But I just want to say, I want to point out this, that Ventre did not give one stitch of evidence that this thing was the the GE Mark II. I didn't hear one bit of evidence to that effect, and I also heard you, Stan, quote a whole lot of good information that would suggest that it was not. So I want to say I'm a guy with over 60 some odd years of experience studying anomalous aerial objects that, well, it sounds like to me that you have the far stronger side of the case. But you know what, I'd like to hear you talk tonight, if you feel like it, is some of the very mysterious phenomena that have happened there in parts of Pennsylvania, which my kids and I were a part of one of them one time. And if you want to say anything about this, would be nice. And if you'd like, I could call back in and tell something that happened to us. But I don't want to hold the line, hold up anybody else who might want to call or anything you want to say. But share anything really interesting with us, Stan, because I know you've been into a lot of that material over the years, and there's some pretty good mysteries there, right?
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. I've been out in the field since 1965 after Kecksburg, doing first-hand investigation into UFO sightings and investigating all types of strange creature reports or cryptid encounters. I've interviewed hundreds of alleged Bigfoot witnesses, many other type of witnesses to all kind of other unusual entities, which these reports continue year after year in Pennsylvania, including in recent weeks. There's been some amazing UFO cases going on year after year, including the last year and the last few years. And it's fortunate that at least we're hearing about the reports, but, you know, so many of these reports you would like to hear in the news, but even today, so many of the witnesses that contact me, they're very reluctant for any publicity. And, you know, my hotline's been open since 1969, and I get many calls coming in almost daily on current and past reports. So between emails and phone reports coming in, there's a lot of activity going on and some really amazing cases.
Yes. Well, let me ask you, do you, some of this activity, thing that happened to my kids and I, we were on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and we were going across Pennsylvania. We were going actually over to an Indian artifact auction in Ohio. But as we were heading west on the turnpike there, do you hear much in that area as you're getting inside of the western half of the state, in the area of the turnpike? Do you have much suggestion of odd things happening in that area?
Yeah, I didn't catch exactly where. What is that area? Is that up around Donegal? Is that the area of Somerset? Is that the area you're talking about?
I'm not sure the town names. All I know is that we stayed on the turnpike, I think, pretty well to its end, and this was at least, I would say it was, an hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour before we got to where it would play out and we'd go into another highway.
Okay, well, I'm not exactly sure where you were. I can tell you, however, there's a lot of sightings all across the state. Southwest PA is very active, and interestingly, as I mentioned in my Solid Invasion book, there have been some very interesting UFO encounters on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And some of those are very fascinating. I remember years ago, outside of Philadelphia in daylight, I was contacted by one of the agencies to interview a CEO and his secretary there outside of Philadelphia when this large object came out of the sky in daylight and came right directly into their vehicle. They thought it was going to hit the top of the car. And they were very frightened and called the police. And but these are the things you never hear about on the news.
Right. Yep, that's true. At the end of this incredible experience, which to tell you the truth, I'm getting cold feet. I don't know if I should even talk about what happened to my kids and I, but at the end of it, in a clear blue sky, there was some drifting white clouds. We saw a strangely matte black object that was like a tube with a big sphere kind of off-centered off one end of it, flying from roughly north to south. And it had no, we were in the car, but we didn't hear any sound, but it had no propellers, it had no fins, it had no wings. And, I don't know what it might have been or if it was related to the bizarre experience we'd had. But once coupled with those two things that happened that day, it's enough to convince me that I don't know, does it seem to you, as it does to me at times, that there are areas of the world where things are more inclined to happen, weird things are tend to be seen than in the average place?
Yes, and we in fact have one of those areas out where I'm at, and it's a fascinating area. It's the Chestnut Ridge. It's a mountain range that runs from Preston County, West Virginia, to Westmore and Fayette and Indiana County. It's about 100 miles long. Year after year, including even the last several weeks, we get reports from different people having UFO observations, having encounters with Bigfoot, other strange creatures, objects dropping from the sky, down onto the ridge, underground sounds, all kind of weird phenomena all along the ridge. And it's an amazing place and just incredible. And I can tell you also that in recent weeks, I'm trying to think exactly what was that, I believe it was August, September, October, was very busy with a lot of unusual reports coming in. In more recent years, too, we're not getting just your typical disc report. You don't hear about those like we did back in the early days as much. But we get a lot of reports of triangular objects, cigar-shaped objects, and we're seeing more and more reports of these very large, sometimes black, big rectangular black objects. And, in fact, just on December 3rd, up in Fayette County, which is that area, a lot of it borders along the ridge. Some of these areas we're getting these reports. That is one of the most active areas probably in the country for Bigfoot, UFO encounters, and other phenomena. But on December 3rd, that morning, there were apparently numerous reports from people who saw this very large, black, solid, rectangular object only a few hundred feet off the ground. And we're still looking into that. And also in October, I'm waiting for one of my associates to finalize a report, but we've been investigating an incident that happened on the Fayette-Westmoreland County border, daylight sighting, remote rural area of this very large black solid triangular object about 500 feet off the ground. And this thing was there in daylight, and there appeared to be a number of different EM effects on the property.
Well, there's something that I've been trying to encourage people in the study of this subject for years to do something about. No one has, but because I and my kids and other people have been involved in the phenomenon I'm going to mention, I'll mention it to you, and maybe you'll get a chance to check it out in the way I'm suggesting. That is the phenomenon, well, you know of the Cache Landrum case down in Texas in December of 1980. Now, I'm kind of inclined to believe that might have been a black project craft that gotten into some trouble or something. But whatever it was, it caused one of the terrible effects that it had was it caused lines of weakness in the fingernails, transverse lines, meaning across the fingernails, that grew up in the base of the nail up toward the end. It caused a fingernail can sometimes break in the middle of it. These medically are called bows, B-E-A-U-S, named after the doctor that started describing them, and Bowes lines. Now, these Bowes lines occur under a number of kinds of conditions, but all of which indicate severe taxation of the organism where these are occurring in the claws or nails or whatever. Let me say it this way. If you've been in a big accident, say in a car, and you're just so damaged that your body has to restore itself, you'll tend to get Bowes lines because the resources of the body are needed more desperately elsewhere for repair than in the nails. Also, if you have been almost starved to death, near-death starvation, you will get Bowes lines because other parts of the body need whatever you've got more than the nails. Likewise, if you're undergoing chemotherapy, this can cause Bowes lines. But in all these cases and others, it means that there has been strong physiological stress that's going on to the body. Well, because of a multi-witness event in October 15, 1984, my kids and I and my neighbors, my wife, and the neighbors and their baby, we all had an incredible encounter with photographs, and there were 6 of us there observing, taking pictures. And after this event, we all had these lines. And I became... I'd seen on TV something about this phenomenon out of the context of UFOs, about how it indicated strong damage to the body. We got quite concerned, as so did our neighbors. They had a brand new baby, too, and we all got these lines after this encounter. Well, a year later, 2 of my kids, my 2 oldest, and I were down in Corpus Christi, and we had another encounter that's been made famous in a book called X Descending by Chris Lambright, wherein I got daylight motion picture film of a series of objects that projected a narrow beam, seemingly a plasma ahead of them in propulsion. And by golly, my youngest child was not with us. It was back in Austin with his mother, and the two older ones with me. And those two children and I all had Bose lines again. Well, what I'm suggesting to you and anybody that meets somebody that has had apparently a genuine close encounter, and in these instances, they don't have to get within 20 feet of you. You can get these events, these effects, when they come much more substantial distances, but not way off in the distance. And what I'm suggesting, since there is big bodily damage, in fact, we came to fear this. We hoped it never happened again, and I hope it never happens again, because you don't know when the damage is going to be so great that it's going to be disastrous. But anyway, what I suggest is that you or other researchers, you find somebody that you know, or people, a group of people that have had an encounter fairly closely. If you could find financing to get a blood workup on these people, or just one person of the group, if only one will consent, you can only afford one test. Get the blood workup. Have that person watched carefully for what may happen. Within a few weeks, the lines will start growing out of the base of the nails. They will become obvious, and it takes them quite some time, of course, to grow out to the end of the nails. But if that happens, then there should be a second blood workup. And by comparing this complete blood workup from both cases, a good physician, a person that's familiar with this field outside of UFOs, physiology, and the changes that occur that could cause the Bose lines, should be able to look at the blood conditions, see the changes across the weeks from the initial event to when these grew out toward the end of the nails, and determine what kind of damage is occurring, whether it was hard radiation or something else, how it affected the bodily function. And if you can do that, you're worthy of getting a PhD in this field for getting some real evidence showing. So anyway, that's my suggestion. If you do encounter that, make history by documenting it with blood tests, immediately afterward, as soon afterward as possible. And later, the second test, only if they get the nail damage. So anyway, am I clear on what I'm trying to express about that?
Oh, yeah, it's very, very interesting. I can tell you of the literally thousands of UFO cases I was involved in the past, going on 57 years. And, of course, when I started out, and I still say the same today, many of the sighting reports we get, whether it's a UFO or cryptid, they initially sound strange and unusual, but when you take the time to properly investigate them, most of them turn to be either natural or man-made in origin. However, year after year, there are incidents occurring we cannot easily dismiss. And I've looked into hundreds of very close-range, low-level UFO incidents that you could not easily dismiss. But in none of those cases that we're out on the scene did we ever have any unusual radiation levels, including that famous case, October 25th, 1973, outside of Uniontown, PA, up in Fayette County, when the state police called my team to come up that evening, when they had a UFO on the ground, or right above it, maybe 100 feet in diameter, big white dome, and interestingly, two Bigfoot-like creatures in the field at the same time. And interestingly, when the state trooper arrived to investigate, when he went over to the area where the object had been, it was gone from the scene. It's too long of a story to get into right now. I have the whole thing in my Silent Invasion book. But anyhow, he said the whole area was self-luminescent and glowing, about 100 feet or more in diameter. He said it was bright enough that if he had a newspaper, he could have sat down within that area and read the paper from the glow coming from the area itself.
Wow. Yes. It's the second time I've heard about the glow like that. You guys ought to, chat on the phone. You could probably have a lot to talk about. Ray, is that it for you?
Yeah. Except one thing.
Sure.
These people are not going to know that they had the Bose lines unless you tell them to watch for them, and they should show up within 3 to 4 weeks after the event. That's all I have to say. But that's what you should look for, is the timing, because there's very little that can cause Bose lines other than the damage that I mentioned, or else an experience with UFOs with energies. We don't know what's involved. So anyway, thanks. Enjoyed talking with you. And Morton, we'll be in touch.
All right. Have a great Christmas.
Bye-bye.
All right. Yeah. All right. Very interesting. So one of the things that occurred to me, and I didn't want to ask you, we only have 5 minutes for the 2 hour, but you know what? I am running live on my own website now, and I don't have a hard ending, so it doesn't have to end right at 10 on the dot. But Stan, do you have any reports, or have there been any reports in Pennsylvania that you're aware of, any crash UFOs?
Well, of course, we talked
besides
about
Kecksburg.
That's the one that's best known. But over the years, there has been alleged crashes going back. I think it was one report of something back in the 40s that really was not very well documented. I heard about. I have heard rumors of other crashes, and of course, you have that incident near Carbondale, Pennsylvania, I believe, in 1974, of something that reportedly fell into a lake up there in that area, and so that's interesting too. And there's other people who have done a lot of research on that case. I've heard rumors, but nothing that really has anything I can substantiate.
Now, you were saying we can go a couple of different ways here. We can talk about, you were mentioning that there's some amazing recent sightings, but also something you talked about earlier kind of sparked an interest in me, and that was the type of craft that you're hearing spotted. Of course, Dave Marler is the triangle UFO guy, great guy. I don't know if you've ever spoken to him, but you're seeing a lot of triangles and cigar-shaped.
Oh, yeah. Well, the triangle reports, I've looked at the multitudes of triangular sighting reports going back to, at least the 1970s. And there's many, many of these sighting reports that come in year after year, including this year. There was a number of triangular sighting reports this past October in this area, and they're fascinating. But these rectangular objects, we're getting more and more reports of these things being seen. And one of the more fascinating cases I looked into was actually June 1st of 2013. This was on a major highway, Route 30, 25 miles or so east of Pittsburgh, 4-lane highway. The witness involved was a non-UFO believer, and something I've come across so many times during my research. Some of the best witnesses I have are people who never believed that these things could exist until they had their own personal experience. And in many cases, these were, life-changing experiences for them. In this case, this was a young mother. She had a 3-year-old child in the car with her. It was around 10 o'clock that evening. She was coming out of a convenience store, making a left on Route 30, and she was eastbound, and she's riding down the road, and she had to almost stop in the middle of Route 30. She said, I couldn't believe there was no other traffic at the time, especially to confirm the story. But she said she had to stop in the middle of the road because just a short distance in front of her, about 60 feet above the highway, is this huge metallic rectangular object, completely silent. The lighting on it was completely different navigational lighting, and it's taken up all 4 lanes of the highway, and her little 4-year-old baby yells, Mommy, flying iPad in the sky. And the woman was on her cell phone at the time, and she was trying to explain what she was seeing. She had to pass underneath the object. When she went under the object, the electronics in her car went out. So, for example, the digital clock went out. The FM radio station signal went off the air. She tried to take a picture with her iPhone. It wouldn't let her go into the photo mode. She lost her cell phone signal. As she rode down the road further, all the electronics came back on. And after I talked to her a number of times since that event, she told me the car she had at the time was not that old. It never worked properly since that night. And those are the kind of cases, I kind of call them the classic reports. These are kind of like the reports that we used to hear about with various type of electromagnetic effects back in the late 50s and the 60s and 70s. You don't hear about them much more. But interestingly, I've been hearing more reports from different people for the last few years of people trying to take photographs with their cell phone, with other digital devices, and every time they tried to take a picture of the object that was there, it malfunctioned. And in fact, this one case we're working on that happened, like I said, this past October, the man seeing this huge black triangle hovering very low. He runs outside. His dog wouldn't go outside at all, refused to go outside. He grabbed his, I believe it was a cell phone. It was fully charged, aimed it in the photo mode, and instantly, he said, it lost all its power. And so that's interesting as well.
I have heard that. As a matter of fact, I had Chase Kletsky on. I'm not sure if you know who she is. She mentioned she had a video camera was trying to film this triangle coming over, and the same thing. It was a fresh battery. The battery was dead. And I've heard that a couple of other times. And, one of the things you hear skeptics say a lot, or I have anyway, is that, wow, everybody is walking around with a wonderful camera on them. How come we don't have any real perfect, UFO pictures, high res and all that? And I personally, my answer to that was when I had my sighting, I didn't even think of taking a picture. I didn't have a camera or a phone or anything at the time. But still, I never even thought of taking a picture. And I think that, there are certain people that are ready, and there are a lot of people that aren't.
Well, something I run into, again, whether it's a Bigfoot encounter where somebody walks out in front of somebody's car, we've had a number of more recent years of what we call Thunderbird sightings of these huge birds with 10 to 20 foot wingspans like a small aircraft. And we had one case, we had 4 people in an area of South Greensburg where there's been a history of some of these sightings, and they all had their cell phones sitting there having a barbecue. They hear like this swooshing sound, and they look up, and 40 feet above them, there's this gigantic bird right over the top of them, and they were all said they were in shock looking at this thing. The last thing they ever thought about was taking a picture. And that's a very common reaction with people who see these strange encounters with a UFO or a strange creature. They're so shocked in some cases looking at what they're seeing that they don't even think about taking a photograph till afterwards.
Right. Something just doesn't fit reality. It takes you a while, like you're saying, wait a minute. There's all kinds of things going on in your mind. There are some people that can react instantly, but myself, I just remember just like, what am I really seeing this? That type of attitude I had, and I didn't even think about anything like that. But, Stan, so we're just, we're at the end of the show. And can you, again, you gave out your website. Can you give that out one more time?
Sure. My website is stangordon.info. They can check that for update reports and also where I might be appearing for different lectures and different programs. My books are also available. My new book just came out called Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania's Unknown Creatures, which has all type of very strange creature reports, including some creatures most people never heard of before. And also my Silent Invasion book has some of those very weird cases with UFOs and Bigfoot, and also Really Mysterious Pennsylvania. They're available at Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com or on my website.
Excellent. Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you tonight. Thanks so much, and thank you for participating in the discussion with John as well.
And thank you very much, and happy holidays to everybody.
Yeah, and same to you, and we'll be talking to you soon. Okay, everyone, so that's it for the show. A few people to thank. I just want to, first of all, say, don't forget, if you're listening as a podcast and you want to listen live at some point, the show is from now on at podcastufo.com. It plays live on the sidebar. It will still be played on the Dark Matter Digital Network. It's just going to be a week late. It's going to be a pre-recorded show on there. And if you didn't listen last week, Art Bell hung up his microphone, so there's going to be no more live shows on that network except for Heather Wade, I believe her name is, who is doing filling in for Art Bell. Anyway, thanks, everyone, and person to thank is Kerry Lloyd Whitehouse. We have his music on this show. Also, Peggy Shunning for managing the Facebook page. Remember to like us on Facebook for all the latest UFO news. And next week we have Jen Harzan, and he is the executive director of MUFON. So you can look forward to that next Wednesday right here, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks a lot, everyone. And if you're listening this far, you're a supporter of the show, or you're listening live. And thanks so much. And Merry Christmas if you celebrate it. Happy holidays to everyone. And talk to you next week.